Order the Local Transportation Funding Ad Hoc Committee for March 24th, 2016. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Niss.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sharp.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you. So this is the first meeting of this committee to begin discussions on getting information on the feasibility and potential form and other aspects of a local transportation funding source. So kicking this off, Mr. City Manager, do we have our polling consultant who was going to be available at a certain time, or was that only if we call him in, or
No.
how is this set up?
Okay, are we on here and stuff? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Well, you have to bear with us since we're doing this sort of on the fly. And we figured this was as much a conversation between you all as what we would be doing as staff. But Dave Metz, who's with Fairbanks, Haslin, and Metz now, might be opening the door. Not quite. He's pulling into the garage. I talked to him 1 minute ago. He's actually able to be here, so he'll be here this morning. So within 5 to 10 minutes maximum, he'll be here and can help talk to you. I mean, I went out and quickly got a proposal from him.
Here he is.
Right on cue.
Good to see you, Jack.
Yeah, here, why don't you sit over here where we've got a mic too for you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Dave. Hi.
Hi.
So I was just telling you that I got a proposal from Dave to do a feasibility study. The proposal has some limitations on it also as it relates to, number of calls, and Dave can talk to you better about this, about the length of time in a call and the impact that has on things. But he's here to, I think help you sort of talk through, the pros and cons of what it is you would want to try to go out and test in this at least introductory feasibility poll. We haven't obviously gone any further than that about charting out anything, because partly you want to assess a number of things before we would do that. And if you recall, the last measure we did was a TOT measure back a couple of years ago, and in that case, we had a whole structure with a feasibility poll. We also had another firm involved, the TRWB, that did help to design a lot of the outreach sort of components of this. And then there were sort of feedback loops through those processes to Dave and his firm on the polls, and went out and did adjustments, I think, and then did subsequent polling. So we haven't designed any of that yet.
Great, and I should also note that I invited some different stakeholder members, and I'm not sure who we might have here. I see Lucy and Richard. So we have Richard Brand from who has participated in the downtown parking issues and as a resident. Lucy Wicks from Stanford. Is there anyone else that was among the invitees for the stakeholder group? I had reached out to the Chamber of Commerce and Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Am I leading off one other?
I had asked if it was appropriate for the TMA
Yeah, I
consultant
responded
to come.
to that.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah. So we didn't think that was necessary for the scope here, because it's really not what the prime purpose of this is. One of the things that we do want to talk about is within this problem definition of at a high level prospective uses of revenue, of which the downtown TMA would be one, and we've had a report on different initiatives that they've had that they are looking at as prospective uses of funds if they had greater funding. So, okay, so one of the things that we need to kind of think through is the process by which we get to narrowing the topics that we might want to have polled, and we have staff laid out an A through E of kind of some of the ways at which we might discuss that. And I think within this, we have a problem definition that we really, to a great degree, discussed last week at the council meeting around a desire to have a significantly greater local transportation set of initiatives to really make a major impact on congestion in our community and indirectly on parking issues and also indirectly on some of our environmental objectives as a result of that. So I guess we could take a few moments if we want to refresh and see if we have some consensus around what's the problem we're trying to solve. But I think for the most part that was referred to us by the council. Does anybody want to provide their thoughts on that, or do we feel like we have enough consensus to go forward?
Why don't you just state what you thought the
Good start
referral from the council was?
Well, first, do we have actually the motion handy, and maybe we can repeat that?
And also, while he's looking on the record, I talked with a number of other cities, and you've got a stash of stuff in front of you that Beth was kind enough to pull out and do. It's a big stash of what they've done in other cities. And as many of the cities said, we're looking to see what you're going to do, because they'd like to have some coordination among the North County cities, which is what already has been happening in the Northwest cities.
Yeah, and as I mentioned at the council meeting a week and a half ago, in discussions with Mountain View and Cupertino, they appear to have somewhat different focus for their interests. They're to date have expressed an interest in trying to come up with funding sources that would be more devoted toward capital programs. And from our discussion, it seems that we're more focused on different services and operational programs. And that's...
The one that's pretty direct, I think, toward transportation, though, if I understood Mike Kasperzak, is they're going to put, for their North Bay Shore development, they're putting $25 a square foot on all the development that goes on out there, hoping to realize a one-time $50 million. And it may go for something capital, but primarily, Mike at least said they hope that it will relieve that incredible traffic problem that they have coming and going in the morning, and I don't know how they think they're going to relieve it, but at least the money will be found for some kind of congestion relief.
And in addition to that, they have several council members who have expressed an interest in an employee headcount tax. So they appear to be exploring both rather than necessarily one or the other.
And Cupertino too.
Well, they haven't put the 25 in yet. I thought they had.
No, they have, yeah. As I understood from Mike, they've already voted it in.
If I just might add on
But
this.
the buildings haven't been built either, so they don't have the money yet.
It hadn't been collected.
So, I mean, my intel's a couple of weeks old, and, everything's moving pretty quickly around the region in this regard, but in speaking with both the city managers in Cupertino and in Mountain View, when I spoke to them 2 weeks ago, their sense was that they were not on a track right now to put any sort of a funding measure on a November ballot. Cupertino had actually, there was a lot of interest there, and then of course, one of their members got out. But my understanding is that they actually didn't have any sort of a successful vote to either move ahead on a particular measure or to even engage looking at doing some polling in the near term. So.
And the other thing that we discussed on Monday is that we have a high likelihood of our half-cent sales tax for the county going on the ballot that would fund regional transportation measures and some that would spill to the cities that could be directed toward local measures that would be coming up with a high likelihood this November, and that we would want to be determining whether a local business license tax, if it went to the voters on the same ballot, would be detrimental to the success of the VTA tax, which it appears likely that we're going to have significant funds that would benefit programs that the North County cities care a great deal about, most specifically for Caltrain. The proposal from the Silicon Valley Leadership Group currently is $600 million toward grade separations in the North County cities, meaning from Sunnyvale to Palo Alto, of which we have the largest number of grade separations, and another $314 million, I believe it is, toward other Caltrain modernization elements that have to do with capacity and service improvements, such as platform lengthening that is necessary for longer trains, a share of the additional cost of train sets for those longer trains, and level boarding, and some other elements that Caltrain has basically identified as unfunded portions of the Caltrain modernization program. We all hear a lot about the Caltrain electrification, but there is a shortfall in funds toward the entirety of the program. So they have the dollars tentatively for the electrification, and even that has some jeopardy because they are high-speed rail. There's $600 million that is high-speed rail Prop 1A dollars, and those funds cannot be distributed to Caltrain until the state has approved the high-speed rail funding plan, which hasn't been done yet. So essentially those dollars are still on hold. It's not preventing Caltrain at the present time from moving forward on the electrification, but I just wanted to kind of put that in the context that we're all anticipating this Caltrain electrification and modernization program, and there are a couple of different ways in which the funding is not a certainty yet.
Can I just add one other thing to that?
Go ahead.
If you're on the same topic,
It is the same topic. It just having to do with the sales tax measure. Liz and I were chatting the other day, and we kind of started thinking of it and framing it as it's something that Palo Alto would do. Would it be complementary or competitive? And also whether this would be more predictable as opposed to hopeful. And then the fact that the sales tax measure would be spanned out, those funds would be spread out over 30 years, too. So there were just some things that we thought kind of helped frame.
Can you explain what you mean by predictable versus hopeful?
Well, if we look back at prior sales tax measures and what we have and haven't gotten, that's the hopeful question.
So just to respond to that, we have the North County and North and West County cities group, and as well as Mayor Liccardo has convened a series of meetings of mayors, and a lot of the discussion, especially as of late, has been on how we can help assure that the allocations that are determined in advance of the measure actually get lived up to. And I think they're on two fronts. One, we had one of the sales tax measures, the 2000 measure, that was put on, I think, by the VTA itself, and was overly optimistic in terms of the revenue that would come about. It went on the ballot right at the peak of the dot-com boom, and thought that that was a permanent trend. And the leadership group has made the case that the measures that they were behind have consistently been much more accurate, and that they've been more conservative in anticipation than that one that was put on by the VTA. Then the second issue related to this is, aside from the total amount of dollars that would come in over the 30-year period, what assurances are there that the distribution of those dollars will come through as is committed. And so that's a lot of what is now going through the process of how do we have greater transparency and accountability on those dollars. I was told yesterday that even the VTA legal staff is quite focused on that issue, that they have, the VTA has probably rightly received a fair amount of criticism over what has happened on that 2000 measure, and that the big elephant in the room of BART ended up receiving its full funding, and a lot of the other elements did not. And so supposedly the VTA legal staff shares the concern to try to tighten up the obligations that would accompany the ballot measure. And we're yet to see those. But I think that those are very valid concerns, but they're either way. They have to do with that VTA measure. As it intersects with what we're talking about, it's really principally a question of whether a local measure could be presented as having distinct purposes in the eyes of the voters, and that we would determine whether both measures might be able to be on the same ballot. And I think, as we all know, that if we were to put it on the ballot as a general tax, not a specific purpose tax, it would have to have some sort of either advisory resolution from our council or a secondary advisory measure on the ballot in order to be able to go forward on a simple majority. Otherwise, a special tax would be a 2/3 majority, and the general tax can only go on the same ballot as our city council election. And so if it didn't go on the ballot this fall, we would either have to put it on as a special tax with a 2/3 majority sometime in the ensuing period, or wait 2 years to consider it again. And that's a big part of why we kind of have a timing crunch at this time, is to determine whether it's viable to, if it's viable to put something on the ballot this fall, and if so, what recommendations would be most feasible, and we have to return to the council with some of that information, so that if we pass this first threshold, we can have deeper discussions on the council's interest in particular uses of the tax and forms and amounts. Now we're going to have placeholders out there for these things for the polling purposes. So that's really what our task is probably most focused on.
Let's just talk about VTA for a minute, because I lived through that whole VTA thing when I was sitting on VTA, when the tax literally in 1, 2, and 3 went down precipitously. It was amazing. And that's, of course, unpredictable. But as far as looking at currently what is going to happen and what they're putting on the ballot, the question is, and we broached it a little when we were there the last time, is how soon does the money start coming in? Probably not for a year and a half. And then how much comes in at a time? So a certain amount has been promised, but the question will be over what period of time, because it's 30 years. So that pushed out over that period of time becomes what is a lesser and lesser amount, because of, hopefully your economy continues to grow. So for the polling, what I would think is we would want to look at not only VTA and the fact that they're going to have something on it, but additionally, what would we put on that sounds different, is for a different purpose, and something that gets money to us faster, which it would, our own measure would, by far, and still that the public felt was supportable. And I think that's going to be, it's always difficult, I think, when you put two measures on. And Dave, how many measures are on now for the fall that you know about or are being polled for? Do you have any idea?
For the county or for the statewide, for the whole ballot?
Well, something that's got some measure that will take money out of the taxpayer's pocket,
I mean, there's
in addition to VTA, and there's the, I
there's
think,
bound to be at least a dozen, I would estimate, in most Bay Area counties. There's 13 statewide ballot measures that are likely to make the ballot, with probably half of those being ones that raise revenue in some fashion or another. Layer on to that what the VTA may do, other potential county or school district measures, the regional parcel tax for bay restoration, and you very quickly get to 10 or 12 revenue measures that would likely be facing Palo Alto voters.
So those are the kind of factors that we have to go through. I was wondering, did you find the motion?
Yes.
Could you just share it?
Great.
Is to refer funding strategies for transportation demand management and other local transportation programs to a mayor-designated ad hoc committee, and authorize the ad hoc committee through a series of public meetings in conjunction with staff to conduct outreach on the extent of the polling and conduct a first round of polling, and return to council with alternatives on approaches as soon as possible.
we didn't give an exact weeks. We played with that and then came as soon as possible.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think Dave can probably help us with that, even though you all have instinctive feelings about the fact actually we have a really truncated time frame to make some no-go decisions as it relates to, say, November of 2016 on a measure. If it's okay with the committee, if I could say a couple of things real quickly, just to do justice to the whole council discussion. I mean, one, the council has delegated to the committee the ability to sort of frame what the feasibility polling would be. In many ways, the problem statement, just sort of cutting to the chase, is focused on addressing transportation issues we have in a way that is a supplement to what might happen on what will happen on the local sales tax ballot measure, but not in the idea of providing more funding to add more to the kind of projects that are on that ballot measure, but looking at TDM-related measures. And it sounds like, in many ways, for the most part, a funding stream that would be, put in simpler terms, more operational than capital now. So that's what you guys are going to be looking at. What kind of funding mechanism? So, earlier we were talking about, we have a sales tax measure, related to, months ago, related to DTA. The council's conversation has really gone towards, specifically, should we look at a business license tax? Now, you guys could have a broader conversation about it than that, but I would think that that's something that Dave could also advise you on. Is did you want to test multiple kinds of funding mechanisms, or do you want to focus on the one? And my sense is, I think there are some challenges with say a funding measure related to TDM, sort of in the sense of how do you define that in a way that it's understandable to the public. And then the question again of when. It seems to me that your charge is really driven to help us define also, should we shoot for November 2016? If somehow the answer to that is yes, then that's one whole time frame, which means a whole lot of work. If it says no, then you have more time to dive even deeper into some of these issues and everything. But it seems to me that your discussion gets focused sooner than later, saying you want to raise money for transportation through a business license tax to be used for TDM type purposes that could go towards supporting our TMA efforts or other things like that. If you don't want to do that, you probably should somehow have a more expansive discussion than that. But
So,
and last thing I would say is we did have a couple of council comments at the meeting that raised the question of saying, well, should we really limit it? Should it be available, for other kinds of purposes if we were to do a tax measure? But the committee, the motion did steer it back towards this issue of transportation.
Yeah, I think that the motion was clear
Yeah.
on that regard. Well, in terms of a problem definition, we might put it differently in around that problem definition is what are the sorts of congestion relief measures that we would want to fund locally that otherwise would not be achievable to the degree that we're seeking them. And let me just toss out a few for consideration, and then we can have a more expansive discussion and see what people either think of these or what different ones should be considered. So we have we've had significant discussion around an interest in expanding the shuttle. We have this coming before the council in just a few weeks. So one is prospectively a significant expansion of our local bus system through a shuttle. Another is the various measures that are being done or considered by the two TMAs that we have going on in the community, the downtown TMA and the Stanford TMA. And we had that whole palette of measures that they are taking, and I think that whatever degree we might use these funds toward supporting the TMA programs would be another category within that a whole bunch of subcategories that we heard a week and a half ago. Another one is neighborhood traffic calming. And Josh Mello brought this to my attention because, as many of you know, we, more than 15 years ago, put all of our neighborhood traffic calming dollars toward local routes to schools, which has been very successful, but we have other neighborhood traffic calming needs that haven't been getting addressed. And I think that the question then is, well, what's the intersection between kind of the congestion that we have today and resulting from the growth in employment and the development we've had in recent years and impacts on neighborhood traffic calming needs. And I think the answer is predominantly that when we have these periods of very high congestion, we get spillovers throughout the neighborhoods. And Josh's comments made me reflect back to the dot-com boom, where we really had a lot of discussion in the community over spillover traffic into the neighborhoods. And we see it again, we're hearing about it again, where there's just more traffic, more rushing of cars through neighborhoods, running stop signs, because frankly, people are trying to get home and get around the congestion that exists now on our arterials. So that's another area.
Now we have apps for it. Just go into Waze.
There you go.
Tell you what neighborhood.
Let me just lay these out and then we'll just go.
About that one.
Yeah, but let me just lay them
Right.
out and then we'll come back and visit all of it. And then others might be, we have our expansive bike master plan. To what degree would any of this funding help supplement those initiatives on the long term? So those are the ones that I had tentatively laid out, and I'm not assuming they're necessarily capturing everything. Karen?
Yeah, about neighborhood traffic calming, you're thinking things such as speed tables, roundabouts, traffic circles. Are those the kinds of things that you're...
Well, potentially. I wouldn't want to get so granular at this point in time as to the particular measures, but yes, those are the types of things that are included in neighborhood traffic calming measures when they're generally spoken about. But
Well, I was just thinking, like, if someone says traffic calming measures, it's like, how's that realized? So people might or might not support depending on what it was.
yeah, I mean, we can ask Dave and each of these, once we get past kind of the uses, once we, and get into polling language, we can have discussions about,
Everyone's going to see it in their own.
Yeah,
They'll
how-
think traffic calming my
what'll be
neighborhood.
the right
Yeah.
sorts of
Yeah.
questions to ask. So that's, for us right now is defining problems, and then going in later, once we've defined those things, how would we want to frame those things in the polling? Dave, do you have something you want to
I was just going to comment on that, because I agree. 'Cause sitting here as a layperson, the downtown TMA, the Stanford TMA, neighborhood traffic calming, I mean, these are very high-level conceptual sort of planning concepts, and for the average voter, I think you're talking about a roundabout, you're talking about speed tables, you're talking about shuttle buses, where would they run? To get meaningful answers, we'll need to give them a little more granular language. Yeah.
And can I add one thing to this too, which is something that people talk about a fair amount, we talk about a fair amount, it's an expensive thing to put into place, is signalization coordination. Because it's not inexpensive, and it definitely can free up traffic.
Right, and we have the basic infrastructure now in place, but the rolling this out has its own expenses, and that certainly has potential benefits on the community. Part of this will, as we go into this discussion, is hearing from staff of which things already have adequate funding sources in our budget, and which really would need supplemental. Greg?
Yeah, so actually I was going to comment on the signalization as well. That's what I was
Okay.
thinking. And I was also thinking we should have a meeting where we have our traffic engineer and maybe other staff and talk about, okay, if it wasn't cost constrained, what would be the highest level things that would get us the biggest bang?
Right, and Josh is at a conflicting meeting, or he actually would have joined us, he said, but
Right.
Jim, I don't know how much you've had a chance to talk with our transportation staff about, from their perspective, what are the measures that have been identified or in our long-term, either in our long-term plan and might be accelerated if we had additional funding, or we weren't able to put in our plan because we simply didn't have funding, but would be beneficial if those funds existed.
Okay. Well, I think we can do that. I mean, I do think that there are lots of things that the council, with both your sense of the committee, your sense of the community, the political support you could have on a measure, we could define those and start to meet in the middle with the projects and things the staff talks about, because it's not like you have unlimited money. I mean, let's just even say, and I just asked Lalo to say, this is more theoretical, if we were to want to pursue a local sales tax, and we've got a 1/2-cent sales tax on the county, do we have anything left? Do we still have 1/4 of a cent in the threshold? So what is a quarter? Forgetting all the issues of.
Do we have a half?
See,
I don't know.
I
know we have at
followed
least.
those
I know we have at
to
least
see
a
what
quarter.
we have.
Yeah, I don't know what we've got.
So I believe
Yeah.
we have a half, but
I'm not, yeah. So one is, you look at either one of those, forgetting the complicating factors maybe of having another sales tax measure on at the same time another sales tax measure is on the countywide. What does that yield, and what does that get you? On the other hand, there was just some kind of initial thinking on a business license tax, say, right, at a particular employee basis level, $100 or something, I think was put out, might yield $5 to $6 million. Then we have the challenge of the cash flow issue that Liz was talking about on the sales tax. Well, when does that start to come in? So, I mean, one of the advantages of an operational measure related to shuttles and TDM and things like that is that we don't have some of the same cash flow negatives that a capital project would have. So just a quick example, if we had $5 or $6 million in a business license tax, we can leverage in debt about 14 dollars for every $1 million that we have. So that's 70 to 80 million dollars if we were to have $6 million a year revenue stream for a capital cost. So then on one hand you say, okay, well, 70 to 80 million dollars is, in one sense, it's a lot of money, but given the issues that we've got out there, is that how you'd want to spend it versus the fact if you had a measure that brings in operational dollars, $6 million is $6 million to fund different things every year that could have much more impact. You know, I mean, being able to really to fund the shuttle and to have some of these last mile subsidy solutions through TMA and all of those things. My feeling is that gets way more bang for the buck in response to the kind of problems that council's going to solve than having another increment on top of funding on some capital projects that still leave us short of what we would need. So I think you guys could start to say, you know, what's your sense of the appetite and what do you want to start to test? And then we could concurrently come back and tell you, well, here are the kinds of things that you could specifically list or identify that want poll for.
So I don't think we should test everything, obviously.
Right.
And I thought the council direction, you know, if I'm wrong, speak up, was much more in the notion of this is for operations, not capital. And I don't feel like we need to test capital, and I didn't think we'd bond on this. I thought this is, you know, whatever we raise is what we'd spend on an annual basis and keep within that.
Well, can I have a clarification on that, though? So if we're doing, you know, roundabout speed tables, that sort of thing, would those be considered capital or operational?
Yeah, so maybe what we'd want to distinguish is major capital projects
And minor.
that are longer term, and that's not what our intention was. But it would be operational and,
They're all pay-as-you-go things.
yeah.
Any of these things would be pay-as-you-go. We don't have to issue debt or anything to make them work.
And I think,
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and I think part of it is, you know, the employee head count. I think that's a little different than a business license tax in some ways. You know, I think we
Let's
could
talk
frame
about
it
that a little more,
differently.
though.
I think we
How
should
is it
frame it
different?
differently. Well, I think a business license tax feels more different. It feels like you're basically charging a business. I don't know. It's just really framing. I think, you know, if we say businesses over such and say pay X number per employee because the employees are what caused the congestion, and that's why there's a direct tie to that, as opposed to you're just paying to operate in Palo Alto. It just feels different to me.
So I think those are important
Good to
points
test.
in that kind of framing of it that around that this is around its purpose, to describe around the purpose of local transportation. One of the things that I want to make sure that the city attorney has a chance to weigh in on is whether how we frame it in any way would influence pardon me, be influenced by the constraints for a general tax. And so that's one of the things that we'll want to hear more about.
So one of the things, to jump in on the granularity, I was surprised at, because we've been watching what the questions were that SVLG is asking. And the slightest difference in a question changed the outcome enormously. And so I think one of the takeaways from a couple of weeks ago is that just adding safety in frequently ups the response, or something that just gets to you. This will relieve the congestion on Middlefield. I mean, that wouldn't be one of the questions, but there are certain things that I think in the community that just resonate right away. And I think that's your job, Dave. But I'm fascinated by how little tweaks in a question change the outcome and the way you put it on a ballot.
I agree. So what Liz is referring to is that on the county sales tax measure, the polling that had been done to date around Caltrain had polled well, but slightly below BART. Now, granted, the BART has had 20 years of essentially marketing throughout the county and 3 previous sales tax measures to convince the voters of the merits of BART, and Caltrain hadn't had any of that. Nevertheless, what a couple of us got in the latest polling language that the leadership group agreed to include was a reference to the Caltrain improvements also improving safety at those locations, and that lifted the support for Caltrain several percentage points, and not only made it up over 70%, I think it was, but actually higher than Bart's.
Yeah, 5 points. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And it strikes me that, for instance, when we talk about our neighborhood traffic calming, I think we as residents see that that cut-through traffic is very much a safety issue. Now, there may be other places amongst these other uses of funds that are also safety-related, but I think that's one that is real and would probably resonate well. And I should have mentioned, too, that when we had discussions from the TMA's major funding uses of funds have to do with funding local transit passes for workers, principally, and then a series of ride-sharing initiatives. And I'm thinking, there are a number of other things that the Stanford TMA is doing, but I'm not sure that they're ones that would fall into what we might be supporting so much. For instance, they are looking at having regional buses that, say, would go to going to West San Jose that are shared amongst employers. They're further supporting even public buses like the Dumbarton Rail System. Plus, the shuttle program that they're doing in the research park is an extension of the Marguerite shuttle, which very possibly would be how we would leverage our shuttle system going forward if Stanford's receptive to it. So we don't have to talk about necessarily the particular entity that would be the expansion of our shuttle, but just that this is what the use of funds would be for. I'm trying to think if I left out anything on Stanford's TMA or the downtown TMA that were major uses of funds, or that if they had additional funds that would expand the...
What we haven't talked about, though, is, and it's very explicit when the VTA is talking about the tax, is just how much we're looking for. Do we want 5, 7, 10? You know, how will we know what it is that will really make a dent in our own transportation? Looking at 5, I'm looking at what some of the other areas have come up with. You know, it's a relatively small amount when you're thinking of VTA, which is coming up with, you know, essentially billions of dollars. We're talking a relatively small amount for our community that probably could come just from, I haven't figured out what it would be on a head count, but that would be interesting. If we could, you know, talk about our 90,000 employees and come up with a number pretty quickly.
And I'd be glad to kind of share some just framing thoughts I've had on that. But
Go ahead, because
okay.
I think we, you know, I know Dave is listening carefully and thinking now, what are we testing for, and what do we want to get out of it?
So first, I would say that there isn't a precise number that I think we can say this is the number that we want, and it's that we could expand these programs to a significant amount depending on the funds available. So if we take, for example, our shuttle program, and we currently, I think, I'm trying to remember our general fund subsidy, and then we have grants, and I think it's totaling maybe in the vicinity of $500,000 a year with the grants.
Is that all?
Well, I thought once I heard 750 and another time 350, but I don't remember
Lalo?
without Lalo.
What do we spend on our shuttle program on an annual basis out of the general fund?
I'd have to look and get back.
Okay. So let's, for a placeholder, if it's in the neighborhood of $500,000, then to quadruple that program would be, or to have a fourfold increase would be an additional $2 million, for instance. And we'll be seeing in just a few weeks, we'll have that deeper discussion at the council on that subject. If we look at transit passes, and now with what the Stanford TMA has been able to negotiate with the county VTA for discounted bus passes that are basically $18 per year per employee at the very high volume, and that means that if we had, they've already rolled it out for, I think, in the neighborhood of 15,000 employees in the research park, maybe more than that now. But if we had, say, a total of 30,000 employees, say we have the research park employees and all downtown employees who are within a short distance, downtown and El Camino employees who are in a short distance of the bus system along El Camino, 30,000 employees would be $540,000 a year. To have 30,000 employees have unlimited bus travel. So there is roughly another $500,000. If it was Caltrain passes, they're more expensive, and as of right now, Caltrain does not offer a discount for entities other than a single business, but those negotiations are occurring. And so if you think about transit passes, those could be, I would say, in the vicinity of $1 million to $2 million, depending on which types and how broadly they might be offered. Neighborhood traffic calming programs could be significant expense. If we spent $1 million a year on that, that would not necessarily have a massive impact. It would have an identifiable impact. But that's certainly a program that if there were more dollars, we could do a lot more. And then some of the lowest costs are things like these ride-sharing apps. And our TMA is looking at piloting the Scoop app that we heard about, as well, and Stanford is doing that as well as their website, and those are probably the lowest cost out of these measures that we're talking about. So I can and then we talked about mentioned whether we would include a more rapid rollout of our smart signals program, which we've installed the hardware and software, but each one of these is an expense to implement it throughout the city. We have the possibility of using some of these funds to expand bike programs, whether they be storage or other infrastructure. But all the elements that we've already identified as these are the tools by which we would reduce congestion, and at the same time reduce the parking impacts, because every car trip that we take off the road is a parker that we take off the road. And when we look at our upcoming sustainability and climate action plan, with having a carbon neutral electricity supply, we now see that 60% of our carbon emissions are from transportation. And so ever getting to the goal of an 80% reduction in our carbon emissions will require real progress in transportation. Some of that will occur through other means like electric vehicles that aren't in our control, but some of this, what we're doing, would have real impact.
Pat, could I say a couple
Yeah.
of things here quickly? So just listening to the potential uses, shuttle, transit passes, ride sharing, bike sharing, we've got a fund potentially this expanded regional bike share program, that is, being sort of put at risk, but we're looking at how to not only maintain it but expand it. Then traffic calming and smart signals. So I'd say like the first four of those things are more designed to actually reduce vehicle trips themselves, and the other two, in a sense, are designed more to mitigate traffic flow and that sort of thing, as opposed to, reduce it. Secondly, I thought Greg's comment was an interesting one and a good one about thinking if it's possible that this is something about the impact that business employee travel has on congestion and these things is a simpler thing than a business license tax. It does seem that there might be a legal nexus test that we have to meet, but even if there isn't, there's a political, or how do you make the case issue, and the there's this potential that it's in that you get more business support also, right, when the business interest is also being satisfied by the fact that all of these transit passes, shuttle, rideshare, all of those are in their interest too, to be able to do those things. I'd say two other things, and then I want to point out that Dave has to leave at 10, so you guys need to start getting his perspective on some things. We have a 1/4 cent left, and there's 3/4 cents total. So if there's a 1/2 cent sales tax, there's a 1/4
left.
A 1/4 for us would yield about $6.4 million a year. Same level as this other vehicle that we've been talking about. So it kind of puts that in kind of perspective as what we could leverage or what we could do. And
Which is a good amount. That would be a helpful amount.
well, that's $6 million, yeah. Or if you did a tax of some sort on employee, you could yield about the same amount potentially. We haven't done the details.
Well, and so that's the other half of the trying to answer this. I tried to frame some of those uses in a very rough seat of the pants notion of the dollars that might be needed to address some of these means. If we have, depending on our calculation, 90 or 100,000 employees in the city, and if we were to come up with a headcount tax that might exempt certain categories, companies below a certain number, I'd actually be interested in then maybe 3 different tiers in my own mind, at least to consider. And this is I'm just sharing thoughts that I've been going through, and whether we might want to poll on scenarios like this or not. It's up to you. But we might have a discounted tier, say, for companies between 10 and 50 employees, and then a base tier for everyone above 50. And then we might consider a surcharge tier, basically, for companies that have employees in densities greater than what our zoning anticipates, meaning that if you're have office workers and you have up to the 4 per 1,000 that zoning anticipates, you pay the base amount. If you're one of those employers, which not all employers are by any means, that have packed in additional employees and have really had that significant contribution to the congestion, then that might be a premium. It might be double the amount. So we might have, $100 as the base per employee, and I don't know whether that might capture 50,000 or 60,000 of the employees in the city at that above 50. I asked Tommy Fehrenbach this question. I think he came back with that employers above 50 employees were in that sort of range, 50 or 60,000.
50, 60,000.
54, 55.
Okay, mid-50s are above employers with over 50 employees. So that if it is out of 100,000 employees and we have 55,000 that are in this category above 50, then at $100 per employee, that's $5.5 million, and then we might have additional dollars coming from discounted rates, or we might exempt below a certain amount entirely. We might not have a premium tier. So these are kind of things that I'd be interested in whether you would even want to poll for. I mean, I'm just putting out on the table thoughts to begin discussion.
I think the polling, though, for that is, when you're balancing the two of them, the 1/4 cent versus the head count, my initial thought is I like the head count better, but it would be very interesting to poll. So, Dave, have you polled for taxing on the heads before?
We haven't. Obviously,
haven't.
this is an idea that's being talked about a lot now,
That's
but this
right.
is kind of a new frontier. But maybe it would be helpful if I just spoke a
Yes.
little bit about the parameters of
Great.
what we can sort of get within this initial poll. So we've targeted a poll of 400 people with a length of about 15 minutes. That is enough to test a range of concepts and understand the high-level support for them. Also to understand people's level of concern about the various problems that we're trying to solve here, and the priority that they would attach to a number of the specific types of programs you've all detailed that could be applied to address them. And it's enough to test for some of these different funding concepts, sort of the pro and con argument that might be associated with each, and see how that affects voters' level of support. It is not enough, especially if we want to test multiple mechanisms, to get into really detailed pro and con argument testing or give people a whole lot of context. We just won't have them on the phone long enough to do that, and frankly, people kind of burn out if you throw too much at them. So what I would recommend as an idea for you all to discuss is a poll which would potentially be structured as follows. Ask people about their support for the VTA tax to start, since that will appear first on the ballot, and it sounds like you all want to understand the interaction between that and anything that the city might choose to put forward. Then test, potentially using draft ballot language, a number of the different funding concepts that you've raised here. And what I've heard listed are some sort of business license tax, a head tax, which it sounds like is a distinct version of that, and a sales tax. Each of those obviously has a set of pros and cons, and we could sort of get an initial read on each of those concepts and see how voters feel about them. Then we could step back.
Dick, will
Yeah.
voters pick up right away the difference between the sales and because the head
No.
count is about businesses, the
Right.
sales tax is about all of us.
I think we'd have to give them an explanation of each
Okay.
of these that gave them enough information to understand conceptually what we're talking about. Then I would say we should step back and ask people some questions about their concern about the issues relating to traffic, parking, its environmental impacts, et cetera. And in the polling we've done for you in the past, we've asked a number of those questions before, so we can repeat them and have the value of seeing how over time concern is evolving. If it's going up, down, staying steady. Then I think we should present them with a list of some of the various solutions that could be funded to see which ones they tend to view as being the highest priorities, no matter what the funding mechanism. And then at the close of the poll, do some of the pro and con testing on each of the funding mechanisms. Here's why this is advantageous, here's why this is disadvantageous, where do you come out? What we would then be able to do is come back to you with some recommendations that say, okay, at a conceptual level, here's what the climate looks like. Is there enough public concern about these issues, enough excitement about the solutions to potentially support some kind of ballot measure? Of the various funding concepts you've tested, are there any that are clear winners that the public loves, or the ones that are dead bang losers that they don't like? More likely are some of these in that gray area where, depending on how it's framed, depending on the language, depending on the public education associated with it, they might succeed or fail. And given that information, I think you all could narrow the field considerably and make some decisions about, is there one of these that is worth pursuing? And at that point, you could make the decision about whether you wanted to do further research to do a deeper dive on that one mechanism and really poke and prod all of the different moving parts within it. And that's basically what we did on the infrastructure polling, was sort of have that sequence. But I would say right now, given that there's a range of approaches you're considering, we wouldn't be able to do one poll that would give you a definitive answer of, would this idea be a go, no-go for November?
And I think we were assuming there would be some iteration to this.
So I come back to the fact that one of the important things we want to find out is when, just because that affects a lot of other things. So how quickly could we put together a poll, get it out, get the results, and be at this point where we have this next phase review where the committee's able, or the council, I guess, ultimately is able to.
If we want to move at a brisk pace here, it's about 4 weeks. If from today, if we sort of leave here with enough direction to put the first draft of the poll together, if we take the next 10 to 14 days to develop the poll, work with staff, go back and forth on refining it, get your blessing to move forward with it, then it's roughly another 4 to 5 days to do the interviewing itself. And then once that's complete, another 10 days or so to do the analysis. We obviously have room to take more time on the front end if we want to have a little more back and forth about how to put it together, and take more time on the back end if we need it. But that's roughly a 4-week time frame, I'd say, is aggressive but reasonable.
So a question, if this group, 2 questions actually, if this group thought that the employee head count was more viable, more palatable than a sales tax measure, is it in the purview of this committee to say, let's not poll on that, let's be more focused on the other? And that's, of
Not
course,
poll on the head count?
not poll on sales tax.
Quarter.
Sales
cent,
tax.
On the
Yeah.
quarter cent, yeah.
And so does this committee have the authority to eliminate that option, and that's provided that we would all agree on that?
You know,
too?
I think my response would be, even though I have a personal inclination to think that the head count is probably the way we want to go, I think it, to be objective, we would want to at least have
I think
a
so.
question out there and hear how that resonates.
I agree with
Okay.
that. I wanted to ask the question, you're going to start with, how do you support the VTA tax in that? First of all, is there any crosstabs or concerns that would undermine the leadership group's polling and ballot measures that could be used against the VTA tax? Wouldn't
I
by
don't think
polling
so.
that, that's the first concern. And the second one is, how do you then segue into, if you have a VTA tax for ½ cent and we put a quarter cent sales tax, does your support for the VTA tax goes down? Is that sort of the question you then ask?
Yeah.
Then you say, and you flag it up, if we have a head tax, does your support for the VTA tax go down? So you ask those specific questions, right?
Yes.
And that would be in this first poll.
Yes, and those are very good questions. So part of the reason for asking the VTA tax first is it's the most objective way to do it, right? It'll be a very clean question. We won't have introduced any other variables at the beginning, and so the results are what they are. Frankly, given that Palo Alto's vote is a relatively small share of the overall county, even if the results here were not hugely favorable, and I suspect they'll be pretty favorable, I don't think that would undermine the overall effort, and frankly, it's data that probably they'd like to have to factor into their own planning.
Sure.
And then you're absolutely right, and I should have said that at the beginning, that what we ought to do, because people be initially giving us their opinion on the VTA tax without hearing about what the city might do, once we've introduced these options about what the city might do, we should ask a follow-up question, which says, now knowing that there may be two measures on the ballot, a county one and a local one, does that affect your willingness to support the VTA measure?
I will say that on the VTA, the 2008 tax measure, which was their last one and occurred right as the crash was occurring,
Okay.
passed by only 1,800 votes or something like
Something real
that.
small.
So
Teeny.
now we're now seeing polling with the VTA tax that is more comparable to what they saw in 2000, when the economy was strong and congestion was very bad. And so on the one hand, they've had narrow passage where what happens here might matter. It probably will matter a little less this time. And I did want to add that I'm interested in kind of a high-level question of would you support a tax on larger businesses to reduce congestion in Palo Alto? I mean, that's kind of a really basic level question that I'd be interested in how that resonates, and kind of with an assumption that that's one that not too many folks are going to say no to.
I would say that's a good, strong, not too hard answer.
A practical question, too, is the first question appropriately does ask about level of support for the VTA tax. If it's a 15-minute poll, how much time do you think you're going to have to spend explaining what the VTA tax is?
Yeah, I think what we would try to do is if there's a model of their 75-word ballot question that they've been using in their own polling, we just would use that exact language.
Okay.
Which, is not a short question, but I think it's the fairest, most objective way to have an apples-to-apples comparison.
So I
You
want,
might be able to shorten that too, because if it really concentrates on what it's going to do for the North County, and I think you could probably do it in less than the 75 words, believe it or not.
That's true, although if we wanted, that 75 words is what residents of Palo Alto will see, as it is the rest of the county, and so that's probably the most objective way of sort of seeing where support comes from.
So I wanted to ask this question. So the sales tax is pretty simple. It's a quarter cent, right? I suppose we could poll on an eighth and a quarter as well, but the eighth probably doesn't raise enough money. So I think we'd probably just poll on the quarter. The head tax is much more interesting in that, you could poll on if we exempt businesses under 25 employees, under 10 employees. There's all these variables on that. We could poll on, if it's over 50 employees, it's now $200 or it's $100 or it's $150. That may be very useful information. I don't know if we have time or if that would be in a follow-up poll, but that would all be really interesting to where to set that. Does it sport change if it's $75? I mean, and as Pat pointed, the bigger the employer, are people more comfortable saying a big employer should pay $200 and a small employer should pay, $50? And should we be exempting our retail businesses? They're probably under the 50 employees anyway, but I have no idea. I mean, what a restaurant, how many employees they have, frankly. And when we say a business license tax, what is that tax? We haven't asked. You register the business and you pay, does every business pay the same? How much would that be? Are we exempting? I don't think we've really, flushed that out when we say pull on a business tax. Or do we just say a business tax?
Well, I think we probably would need to have some rough amounts that would be polled. Dave, does that seem correct in this first poll that we?
It does. I mean, we want to be able to explain, this is a business license tax. It is a flat fee paid by every business when they register, or it is a fee paid based on revenue or size of, location in Palo Alto or whatever the mechanics might be that the rate is determined. We'd want to have some brief explanation of that. And I think the Vice Mayor is right that the sales tax is straightforward. We don't need to do a lot of probing on that. But both the business license tax and the head tax, it's probably helpful at this early stage if we can add a couple questions that get at some of these very key questions about, are there tiers, are there exemptions, and that could apply to both the head tax and a business license tax.
So
especially exemptions. People want to know below
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
So in order to poll on tiers and exemptions and amounts, do you need us to give specific guidance on that, or would you, in this first poll conceptually on asking folks, should this exempt small businesses without saying where that demarcation is, or should it have different tiers depending on the number of employees or the densification of employees or any of those things?
I think it is probably helpful to have something that's a little bit more specific. And I don't know if we have the data right now to know, if the cutoff is 50 employees, if we exempt small downtown businesses, if we, where the various cutoffs might be and how that would impact revenue. And if we have at least a rough sense of that, and I realize we won't have it all completely broken out, but I think it would be helpful in the polling to be a little more specific.
So if we were to think that whatever we ask Dave to poll is not necessarily what would be the tax, but just would be a point in the sand on what to ask, let me just toss this out for expediency's sake and see what you think. Would we want him to ask whether there should be exemption for businesses under 10 employees or whatever number we decide on? Ask another question of, should smaller businesses that are not exempt pay a lower rate, say businesses below 50 employees? And then we have a question of a base rate, and should we ask him use the $100 per employee for the larger businesses as the base rate for the question?
These are all head count questions.
These are all head count questions. And then the final question would be, should there be a surcharge of a higher rate for businesses that have added employees over normal density?
So
I think those are
over code implied density. Is that what
Well,
you're referring
this
to?
goes into, that's what I'm implying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not,
I think we've got to keep it relatively simple, though, on this first go-around. If we get, I think maybe simplicity, if you ask, if we have a different, if it's, a different amount, whatever you want to use.
well, that's what I
under
asked
50
Dave, and he said it needs to be something, he needs some guidance that's a little more
Right,
concrete.
but I don't know if saying things like, if they go over code, then
Yeah.
so forth happens, means much to them. I
Right.
think probably what they want to know is fairness. If I don't have so many employees, do I have to pay as much? If I've got this many employees, it's about that. But if I'm one of those big, overwhelming businesses that's causing all the traffic, then should they pay the most? Is kind of what we're implying.
I think that's exactly right. I think saying exempt under 10 employees, and then have an extra charge that applies to particularly large and dense businesses without getting into exactly how that's defined. I think that gets you what you need.
So a question here is a way to get at this under 10 employees, which it may well be, 10 or fewer employees, or is it exempt retail, nonprofit? I mean, I don't know what's going to resonate
I think
more.
they're separate questions, but I think we need both those
And I do
questions.
think they're
Yes,
separate
yeah,
questions.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a
I
good
do think we
question.
need-
And then something else that we haven't touched on, but you made me think of it, Dave, when you mentioned downtown, that we maybe need to clarify this is citywide versus downtown.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So just make sure we're
So
all
the
talking
other
the
thing
same
I wanted
thing.
to clarify, and I don't think it matters on a conceptual level of polling, but in thinking about this, the way I envisioned it, it would be that for the first 10 employees, you have no tax. So if you actually have 25 employees, for instance, you would get taxed on the 15 employees above that. You don't want to basically set up a system where for the
Right.
first 10 employees you pay nothing, you hire number 11 and suddenly it costs you $1,100. I think that's a
Right.
disincentive, and I think we'd be setting up the incentives wrong there. So we need to look at that when we look at overall how this
That-
works.
And
My
that
guess
might be
is
in
that's
the-
a later
as we get
poll
in the structure of the tax.
I agree. I just wanted to throw that out
Down
in
the
case.
way, yeah.
So if I could put my timekeeper hat on here, since we have like 15 more minutes with Dave, just thinking about this, the schedule, aggressive is 4 weeks, so we're usually not in the aggressive category, but let's just even say May 1st is when we have this info. And if we were to have a ballot measure in November, that would have to be ready by the first week in August. Council actually goes on recess in July. So in any case, number one, the kinds of questions that we're talking about and the information you have, do you have any feeling as to your ability on May 1st to tell us whether or not things, to deal with the implications of a November ballot? You know, to be able to talk, it's a presidential election, all the pluses and minuses of that, what that data says.
So we'll draw
That's
our
correct.
sample of voters to be those who are likely to cast ballots in November of this year, which obviously is the highest turnout election that you all would be looking at. Within that universe, we can look at subsets who are likely to vote in an off-year governor's election, in a special election, in a primary election, and give you a sense of how sensitive levels of support are to those different election dates. But with an eye on November being the most immediate and most likely outcome. I mean, generally speaking, as you all know, anytime you're talking about tax measures to fund public services, higher turnout elections are generally better because you get more voters who support those kind of investments who are showing up on the natural.
So if it's May 1st, and you're able to come back and say to the council, it looks like the polls indicate that November could be a good time to go to the ballot. We have May and June, let's just say, till July, to do almost all the subsequent, the follow-up polling and all of that, and get the question exactly right. Is that enough time?
Yes. From the polling perspective, and obviously there's a lot of policy development work that would have to take place
Right.
concurrently.
And
So-
outreach work, I mean, you guys got to deal with that too.
You would have enough after today to begin formulating questions?
I think so. I mean, I think this is certainly enough for us to put together, assuming the framework I laid out seems to make sense to all of you, to sort of put that skeleton together. And maybe there's places where your subsequent reflection or staff's work will lead us to tweak the numbers we use or the specific descriptions we use. But I think this gives me what I would need to put the basic framework together.
So, I'm sorry.
Just one other thing, which is going back a step here. But one of the things, because you said you wanted some specifics in order to be able to explain to the polling public what the topic is. So we didn't mention RPP, and it's not traffic, but it's certainly a result of traffic. So could we put in this, funding of our RPP programs? I mean, it's an expanding program, so it seems related. And would it fall into neighborhood traffic calming, or it's an effect of?
Well,
And it's not an inexpensive endeavor.
Maybe long-term included, I don't know if we want to test for it, though.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there.
I think it's complicated enough to try to explain it to
Mhm.
everybody right now.
Yeah, I'm just
But
putting it
maybe
out
the
there.
So, Dave, before you actually do this, do you need to meet with us again, or have you got enough to go? I'm trying to figure out how fast you can actually move it.
I mean, we'll definitely want to get this committee's blessing for the instrument, whether we need to physically
what I
meet
wanted to
or
know.
whether it's sent around for comment or feedback. I defer to all of you on the best process.
Well, let me just respond to Karen. So my first reaction was, boy, that's complicating it. But if there was a question that was adding whether this program, how would they feel about it if it was used to reduce overflow parking in neighborhoods?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a conceptual question, and if we saw that had 80% support, we might think differently. If we saw it didn't resonate broadly in the city, then that might move us in a different direction. So I'm not sure that having a question around that wouldn't inform us, and I think that's the purpose of what we're looking at
Right.
I think it
now.
depends what questions we lose.
Yeah, I
I mean,
do
because we're
too.
limited to
Right.
15 minutes, and I
Right.
mean, there's a whole bunch of questions that actually would be great to know.
And I
I'm not
wouldn't
sure
put that
that's
at the
top of
very
my
top,
list, to be
yeah.
honest.
I would
So-
say that.
I'm not sure in the public
Nice
it's
to
not.
know if we
I'm
could.
not sure in the public it's not a big interest topic, though, given how many neighborhoods are wanting RPP. So,
a couple of things. I think, again, the key thing is for us by the 1st of May to be able to roughly know whether or not a measure around the general parameters that we've talked about without even, all the detailed questions. I mean, let's just say a head tax on employers that yields $6 million, I'm just making these things up, $6 million a year that would be used for, these various transportation improvements, for Dave to be able to say, yes, that could work, and then we get these subset questions that add more. Boy, if you framed it this way, you'll see some increases in the support, all of those things. That sounds like you know enough now to be able to put this together, to come back and feel accountable to the committee and us, that you can inform us right on the next steps. And I just want to make sure you guys are okay, because, and then the last question I would ask is this idea of circulating the concepts that we're talking about back to the committee, or the specific questions, or what? And then if we do circulate that, I mean, we will be putting this out in the public realm in advance of the.
So, on the kind of the process going forward, because this has to be on a fairly fast track, Dave, you were talking about taking what you've heard today, formulating questions, meeting with city staff. I think a question for us is, do we need either this committee or a subset of this committee to be available to work with staff as Dave comes back with these questions, to give any feedback on what Dave has come up with? And so it could be just assigning a subset of this committee to meet with Dave and the city manager to review those, or we could try to have a whole nother meeting when we see those.
How quickly are you going to have those?
Probably mid next week.
So maybe we can meet the following week?
Yeah, we don't want to lose much time. And, well, that's if we did it as a whole committee. The other alternative is that we could have 2 two members of this committee just be able to meet with Dave and the city manager whenever Dave gets those questions.
Because I think, Greg, aren't you and I both out next week?
So we're out next week, but I'm here the following week.
Right, same here.
But I'd like it as soon as you could do it. Because
Yeah.
if you're saying mid-next week, then maybe that's the time, if Pat and I are here, we could take a quick look at it anyway and see where you're headed.
And
with
next
it.
week, I'm more available than the following week. So if you're going to have it mid-next week, if it's fine with the others of you, Liz and I can just meet with Jim and Dave to hear Dave's.
Fine with me.
Just to keep
Yeah.
I
it
think
moving.
time's the more important
That's
factor
fine with
for
me.
us, right?
Yeah.
I think it's fine. Maybe the questions could be emailed to us if we have any,
I think that would
hard
be good.
questions.
Could we email the questions to the rest of the
Yeah.
committee if we have any
Yeah.
like?
please.
I feel better if you all had eyes on it.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too.
I'm sorry, but if there is feedback that goes to Jim and Dave, that's one thing. If it's feedback,
No, it should go to Jim.
that's
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
and that can't be.
It won't
that
go to
can't
you
be
guys.
shared with Liz and me.
Right.
right, no,
So
it
they
should go
would
to
be
Jim.
taking.
Right, we
Right.
can't know the results.
Right, right.
Exactly.
But if you all,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
put everything through Jim, and then if Jim communicates with each of you so that you all have a chance
Jim
to...
cannot share
Right.
with us
Yeah.
outside
So you and
of
I
the
can
public
talk about
meeting what
Right.
input he received from
Right.
Karen and Greg.
And Jim, could I ask you if you would, because we're both out, the most expedient way to get a hold of us, at least I'll speak for myself, is if you would text me
Mhm.
and let me know that the questions are available, then I'll know to go check email
I'm a
to.
millennial, I'm texting.
Well, I mean, as opposed to just assuming an email is going to get, you know. I didn't say tweet, you know.
Okay. All right. So does this feel
Is
like
there-
we've given them enough guidance?
Yeah, you got enough?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
As I say, I'll probably circle back with you on some specific, sort of detailed follow-ups, but I think this gives me very helpful direction about how to structure things.
Okay.
And then, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this in advance, but, assuming this comes back, it's got some positive results about where we go. It then gets more complicated, right? I mean, again, how we would put these items out, but the whole question of the advisory measure along with those are things that you don't poll for, is it as much as
You might in
advise
a
on?
follow-up poll,
Okay.
but I think it would depend. I mean, look, if the results show that we're at 80% support, then maybe we want to do a specific tax. If we're at 53 or if we're at 60, all of that will dictate, I think,
Yeah.
how those
Yeah.
conversations go.
And Lalo, you had something?
You had asked the shuttle budget at $645,000 a year.
Wow.
Of that, $585 is paid by the city. We had a $60,000 grant, but that's going away, so we're probably going to make a proposal in the 17 budget to make it up.
Thank you.
So roughly 700 probably for the next one?
No, it'll stay at 645. We have 585.
The only
from
thing that
city.
doesn't increase in cost?
Oh, well, that's the request we got so far from staff.
Okay.
So, great. Thank you, Dave, and I appreciate your willingness to
my
move this
pleasure.
quickly.
I had to dive in.
You must have
great.
hit traffic this morning.
It was a little, yes, it was an
Yeah.
hour and 45 minutes from Berkeley.
Yeah.
And how
Oh,
much of that
wow.
was from when you got off the freeway?
All of it was.
Isn't that shocking?
Jeez.
Thanks. I wanted to
playhouse.
focus while Dave was here on utilizing him, but we have Richard and I see Lucy left. Is there anyone else from kind of
Well, there's
these?
SVLG,
There you are. Great.
yeah.
So why don't you join us at the table and we'll just have some, open it up informally to any thoughts that either of you have on what you've heard in this discussion. And I'm sorry we had to kind of focus on using Dave and get done what we had to get done while he was still here.
And Molly too at some point.
I better
Yeah.
get over to the microphone, right?
Yeah, that'd be good. And also, Molly, I don't know if you want to wade in on any of these aspects of the specific tax versus a general tax and any constraints we may have. And what we can do
Would that be
there.
helpful, just to make
Sure, you want to start off, and then we'll go into the other discussion.
I think I'll ask it.
Thank you,
Just have it on record.
Mr. Chair and committee members, City Attorney Molly Stump. So folks will remember there are two general types of taxes, special taxes and general taxes. General taxes do need to be on a general municipal election, which constrains you in time. It would be this fall 2016. The next one after that would be the fall of 2018. General tax only requires 50% plus one to pass, and it needs to be legally unrestricted funds. Now, there are ways for jurisdictions to indicate their intention with respect to use of the proceeds, and that can be done in a variety of ways. There can be a resolution passed by the local legislative body that often gets incorporated into the arguments pro and con and into the general campaign and dialogue around the measure. If the tax is legally restricted to a specific purpose, it does become a special tax, and that requires 2/3 vote to pass. It has more flexibility in terms of the timing that it can be placed before the voters. It can be at any local election.
So is what we're talking about general enough, or is it too specific since it's on transportation in particular?
It's not the specificity of your discussion, it's how the measure is ultimately drafted. So if the measure that's put before the voters has a legally binding restriction on the use of the funds, it will be a special tax. We can draft it as a general tax, even though you've had very specific discussions about your intentions, and you will be saying to the community, this is what we will be using the funds for. Folks who may oppose the tax are able to say, with respect to a general tax, well, and you see this a lot in campaigns, a jurisdiction says they're going to use it for this, but it's not a lockbox, and changes can happen, and in fact that will be, as a legal matter, true. A future council could legally change the use of the funds and use them for other general purposes. And if you change that...
Prior to their recall, or...
There you go. So it becomes a political and a policy issue, and obviously in this community, folks are held to account for their reputations. So is that helpful?
Yes, and so to help with the assurance, does it monkey with stuff or clarify things for the public? Like if the city council passed an ordinance, concurrent with the ballot measure saying that, here's where we're going to spend the money. Is that just like...
Ordinance or resolution?
Yeah, there you go.
It's typically done through a resolution. We could think about whether there's any problem with doing an ordinance. Off the top of my head, I don't see one, because of course an ordinance can always be changed or repealed by a subsequent ordinance by the same council or future council right before they're recalled. So that's fine to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't then become a part of the measure that goes before the voters and is legally binding, and that's the key issue.
Okay.
And one other thing that may have an obvious answer, but I don't know. Could you simply impose a head count fee on, just as we were discussing it, without going to the voter?
Now we got it stumped.
It's a complicated question. Many more things are possible with voter approval. Without voter
that being
approval, we're
a
in
given,
the very
right,
constrained area of having a nexus or having certain types of special requirements with our various constitutional amendments over the years with the tax revolution that we've had in California. It's restricted and quite difficult to do. I don't want to, just at that level of generality off the top of my head, I don't want to say it's absolutely impossible, but I think it would be very challenging to do.
Well, going to the voter always is a more inclusive way to do it, of course. But I was interested in, because so many, people are looking at this all over the map now, especially on the South Bay, as to what kind of tax or fee or what it might be is going to be imposed.
But Mountain Views is more like, you're talking about fees. Mountain Views is more like an impact fee.
Yeah, it is.
I would think.
Yes. So yes, impact fees are not technically taxes, so they don't require voter approval, but they do have very specific requirements, and they're typically imposed, as you know, on new development.
Right.
So then you're able to assess, and there needs to be a study to justify that the new development will have a certain given impact, and you're allowed to collect fees to mitigate that. So
Right.
that's one way
What Mountain View
it
is
can be
doing,
done.
actually,
But
yeah.
but what you're talking about here is including all existing
Right.
built
Yeah.
structures
Yeah.
and businesses that are operating, and so that's a little different.
Okay, so let's open it up for our stakeholder participants. Go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Mayor Barrett and members of the council and everyone on the committee. My name's Chris from the leadership group, and so we appreciate you having this open discussion about...
What's your last name?
Chris O'Connor.
Okay,
From
thank
the
you.
leadership group. Having this open discussion with members of the community and businesses as well, inviting them here to the table while we explore options. Our biggest priority while you're exploring all of these options here in the future, of course, and you mentioned, is that county-wide sales tax measure in November. Mayor Burt, you mentioned a number of benefits here for Palo Alto, specifically regarding Caltrain, but in addition to the great steps, the extra $314 million going to Caltrain, and also there's a number of areas of funding which will specifically benefit Palo Alto and the North County as well. And so we do appreciate you taking that into consideration, knowing what we're trying to do for the entire system, everybody in the community. A number of the options you're exploring today, we would have to still consult with our members, and we're glad that you had this again, that you're having this open meeting, so we can all analyze this together and provide feedback when appropriate. So I also gave my card to your pollster that you're discussing with earlier, so happy to discuss with him what options we can play with the work he's doing.
Great. Richard?
Yes, Richard Brand, and I live at 281 Addison. As most of you know, I'm a resident. Yeah, this is a good meeting, and I think a lot of good things came out of this. I'm very encouraged with the pollster and his ability to turn this around quickly. That's a real good sign. And I didn't hear him say no once, so that's a good thing. I would say, and I appreciate being invited to the meeting, for the record, I have been a stakeholder for the RPP program downtown, and have attended several of the TMA meetings. It was interesting, the Stanford TMA program was interested in its approach, and I don't know, I guess our Stanford rep left. But one of the things that came out of that was the Stanford TMA did a survey of their ridership of employees, and they found 20% came from the East Bay, whereas the staff work found at 9%. And I tend to believe that the East Bay, because if you look at the growth that's coming, was before the 2008 drop, the growth in the housing was in the East Bay. And I think we need to also consider East Bay percentages as being about 20%.
Can I ask, when you said the staff work, did you mean the downtown TMA survey?
No, it was a staff survey that initially kicked off the TMA program about a year ago when TMA was presented by, it wasn't Hillary, maybe it was Jessica. It was the research that had been done, and I'm not sure where, I could send a note to Jessica.
I was trying to figure out whether that was...
It was lower than I expected.
But was it a survey of downtown employees? Yes, I think so. So I think,
Okay.
actually, I think they
Stanford
surveyed
versus-
two different sets of employees, and that's very interesting, whether the employees in the research park tend to be from a somewhat different geographic area than the downtown mix.
I would say...
Or a different
yeah,
balance, I should say.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know what Tommy's found about the balance of retail versus technology, software-related employees or downtown. It's a good question, isn't it? Unfortunately, the polls are not going to get us that one, but the poll will be done of residents, I assume, or is it going to be employees as well? That was not clear from me.
No, it would be of residents, voters, basically.
Okay, good, because I think that's an important thing as a voter. We've got to figure out the residents are going to be sensitive to what helps me and what's going to cause me to open my wallet, right? It's got what's the benefit? It's about a me thing. Let's see, I think, because most employees don't vote, so the head tax thing becomes something that they don't have a vote in, but I think residents may tend to say head tax versus sales tax. That's my guess. One last thing I would suggest, I'd say, where's the VTA here? I understand leadership group, but they represent businesses, and the VTA should maybe be giving us some input as well as Caltrain JPB member representative, because obviously we live and die with Caltrain service here. Bart doesn't do us much good here in the North County, as much as it's important for South County. And I did take the VTA survey twice, which I thought was interesting. And in the first survey, and just
You mean you happened to be called twice?
no, it was actually an online survey. You can take it as many times as you wanted. I thought it was interesting. So the numbers I wonder about. Yeah.
Note to self.
And in the first survey, Caltrain wasn't even mentioned. And it was very biased towards, you'll be benefited from BART. So I think, obviously, we've got an issue. That's why I'd like to see VTA here to give us balances in terms of our needs, because we've got the traffic and the parking issues are very local. And thank you.
Great.
Could I make a comment?
Sure.
This is mostly just to you, Chris, is that we just asked that, and I know you would recognize that, the council's very much in the preliminary stages of just doing a feasibility poll. So, when you're talking to your members, we haven't even begun to do outreach, on behalf of the council to, our business community on this. And I think it's really important that it's understood that the council is exploring this option right now, and the city itself also would, be very engaged if and when we ever were to go forward with some sort of measure, to be sure we were engaging with our folks. So.
Oh, sure, and that's why we know we're happy just to be here. This is a very open discussion. You guys are talking about a number of different options, as well as how that fits within your overall funding strategy. So we do appreciate the inclusiveness and no knee-jerk reactions right here. So,
Chris, have you been involved in any of the other cities who have been having these discussions? I know San Jose has been having an extensive discussion
Chris
about
isn't tracking what's happening there. You're probably not doing your job.
We've been involved very closely. I work particularly on transportation and housing issues, and so, but we do have staff who are also engaged in San Jose, as well as some of the other options that are being explored by Cupertino and Mountain View as well. So one of the things which I think stands out about what this committee is doing is how you're taking a very methodical approach and very open approach to it, and that's something we really do appreciate. It's not coming out of the blue. It's you're asking business and your community what might be viable. So, and then I would still need to come back to my organization and sort of think about how some of the questions would be formed and what we would think about it, potential poll, but understanding that every single, as you know, in every single public poll is available to a potential opponent too. We understand this would just be a city poll, and you'd be talking about the VTA wide measure. It'd just be here really specifically the residents of Palo Alto. If that's your intention, it wouldn't be to sort of partner in a larger effort with it.
Right. We've had some discussions with some of these surrounding cities of whether there may or may not be an alignment of putting similar measures on the same ballot.
Sure.
I'm not sure that that's going to be happening, but there was just a question of whether it would be more effective to do it that way. But it seems that some of the other cities have their own notions of the scale of that they're considering and the purposes, and I think what we have in common is that all the cities are struggling with a monstrous issue of the congestion that we have. I should share also that at a week and a half ago, when we had our council meeting that had first two different study sessions of presentations by our downtown Transportation Management Association and the Stanford Research Park TMA, and then an action item discussion that led to this committee. I believe that Carl Guardino was there for all those presentations, and one of the things that emerged from the Stanford Research Park TMA, which serves close to 30,000 employees, is that the dozen largest companies in the research park are now active in their TMA, and that they had expressed, when Vice Mayor Scharf and I met with them, that congestion issues and the resulting impacts on their employees were probably the greatest threat that those companies had toward their survivability in the research park and their viability. It's a huge impact on their ability to recruit and retain employees, and that basically today we, and this kind of goes to what Richard alluded to. I think the research park, with higher paid employees on average, have some folks that when they took a job there, they were looking at commuting from San Jose or maybe the East Bay and had calculated, say, a half-hour commute, and now that commute is over an hour, and that same job becomes less attractive to them as a result of that commute. And so they see this as a crisis for them. So that the very things that are really important quality of life issues for residents, we're seeing a strong alignment with the businesses that it has to be solved. We certainly are very enthusiastic about what can come out of the VTA tax that would benefit us as a region and the North County as a subset of that. But we see that there are a whole bunch of other things that wouldn't be able to be funded out of that have to be solved, or we're all going to have businesses are going to in Palo Alto are going to be at a crisis, and the community's quality of life has already been suffering and needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, and we survey our CEOs and senior executives every single year, and the top two issues that they identify universally about the challenges of operating in Silicon Valley are the reasons why I'm employed, because I do transportation and housing. It's those two issues, and so we definitely understand the crisis you are in the middle of, and finding the best way to do that by engaging your community is truly appropriate.
Great. Richard?
Yeah, to that point, and some of you know I've been working pretty actively on trying to get the Dumbarton Rail reestablished, because the transportation is regional. It's not just a countywide or even citywide issue, of course. And so, and one of the issues that with this East Bay thing is, and I talked to the transportation people at Google and also Facebook, and we know now that Facebook's trying to fund some ways to do that, to get this, and I've talked to the people at the Menlo Parks City Council. I know that previously some of the tax funding was allocated to Dumbarton Rail. That got pulled and put into the BART. I would encourage that to relook at that, because the regional issue, we have a terrible problem, because I take my grandson to Redwood City in the afternoon and Middlefield. The roads going east in the afternoon are totally jammed in our city.
Well, we heard from Dave Metz, who came from the East Bay and was late as a result of that.
Well, and Crescent Park neighborhood is trying to get some relief there too. So It is a regional issue.
Yeah.
And if I just might partially respond, I know this session is primarily to focus on Palo Alto solutions, and so I definitely respect that. But with the VTA measure going forward, at least what the leadership group is recommending too is that there's going to be a statutory cap in there to make sure that nothing above 1.5 billion of a $6 billion measure goes to BART, because we understand the historical grievances behind that. It's something which Supervisor Smitty publicly requested early on of our CEO, and we have accepted that too. So,
great. Anything else from colleagues here?
Oh, good.
And I don't have any speaker cards from members of the public. Oh, welcome. For first comment on public comment on this item, and then we didn't have any for oral communication for items not on the agenda. But did you wish to speak on this item?
Yes. Do you want me to go there?
Yes, go right ahead.
And I have to apologize to the members of the committee. I have a 10:30 call I have to jump on. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Hey, Chris, do you have a card?
Yes.
Hello, Mayor and members of the committee. Jessica Linen with the California Restaurant Association. Spoke in front of the council several times on issues that affect businesses, because my members come to me every day. And it's something that I'd like the council to note out. I have heard in this discussion so far today that a head count may be favorable, and I just want to point out that the restaurant community works a lot longer hours. They have a lot of part-time employees, so a 50 employee threshold, a lot of small restaurants supersede that. So I think it's really good to note that even a restaurant that has only one location, that may have a resident who lives in Palo Alto who owns the restaurant, may employ 60, 70, 80 people because they have to have chefs that come in before hours to prep. Then they have to have the cleaning staff before hours, and they're all on payroll, they're all employees. So there's a lot of time that restaurant, whereas the storefront only says 9 to 5, or 9 to 9, or whatever the restaurant may be, that's not really the case. So that's really good to keep in mind. In addition, I've spoke to at the last council hearing, and I'd like to say it again, is that the city does have a registration fee. So businesses are paying to be located here in the city. So it's not that businesses are not paying to be here. The Downtown Business Development District, they also pay, and that's around $450. So businesses are paying really high amounts to be here. Lastly, I'd like to also mention that San Jose is putting a 1/4 cent on the sales tax on their ballot, along with the VTA tax. So it's something that I'd like the council or the committee to not rule out, because it is happening in other cities. Also, I'd like to be a part of the stakeholder group. I've come here several times. I'm probably one of the only business individuals who comes to pretty much every council hearing and committee hearing. So please reach out to me. I have members that are very vocal in this city, in this community, and I'd like to be a part of the discussion going forward, because it does affect the restaurant community strongly because their profit margins are so thin.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you say you have all these part-time, if we had a 50 employee limit or a 25 employee limit, and it was a full-time equivalent,
So that would be different.
so maybe you could get us some information
Right.
that sort of talks about how many restaurants and what kind of number of employees they have, and how that looks on that. That would be fascinating information for us.
So I can pull my members and get some information from them. I don't have a large employee base or membership base in Palo Alto, to be completely frank, but I can ask them. Also, I'd like to mention that some of my members are franchisee owners, so that would be different, only because they might have locations here and other jurisdictions. So I'll try and get you as much information as I possibly can.
Do you have a card?
Yes. Yes.
And I'll just add that we, I think, are open to having a healthy range of stakeholders, especially as part of an informal advisory group, especially if we move forward to next steps. We did invite the Chamber of Commerce. They didn't have someone here today. I think making sure that our retailers are represented, whether it be through a chamber representative for retailers or through restaurants, I think we'd be open to that. But one of the things that we've had in the discussion with these stakeholders is wanting to have an understanding that there'd be an open-mindedness, and we don't want stakeholders who, if their starting position is purely oppositional, and that's not terribly constructive. So if it's under an understanding of providing a perspective and wanting to make sure that the considerations are broad and thinking about broad ramifications, I think we'd be open to that. Okay.
Another question. At the very end, you said how many restaurants you represent.
So I have to. Yeah, sorry. I have to pull the list. It changes a lot, whereas if we have new members or memberships drop off. But because I represent all 9 Bay Area counties. So I want to say it's about 20 here in Palo Alto, but it could be more or less. So don't.
And clearly they opt in or opt out, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So they participate in our association on a yearly basis. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
All right.
Meeting adjourned?
I think we.
And
Unless
we'll
anybody
just
has
leave-
anything else?
We'll leave it to, we'll work with you to schedule the next meeting of the committee if need be.
Great.
Next meeting, I think.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay,